Hello everybody. I wanted to do a video um because as I've said in uh possibly I might have said in a few videos in the past, I do prep for in case of you know certain things happen in the country and you need to get out of Dodge. Um you have basically the necessities, and I wanted to talk about them quick. Normally, just some basic stuff that you might want to keep in a bug out bag, um, or a GTH bag, or a GTHD bag, otherwise known as a get the hell out of Dodge bag. Um, and for starters, I want to just show one thing that I have on me that I normally keep in a bug out bag is these candles. Now these candles are rated to last up to 6 hours, meaning they're slow burning wax and they're capable of lasting for up to 6 to 9 hours. Um, that is a big thing you want to have. You want to have some kind of light source. A flashlight will work, but that will only work for so long. The next thing is a form of ignition. Um, I keep multiple forms of ignition, this being one of them, a Zippo lighter. Uh, Even when they're not, uh, don't have a light source or can't light any, have no fuel in them, you can still use it to light something by just putting it near something that can ignite and flipping the switch. This one, however, does not have any fuel in it. That's the only drawback with a Zippo lighter. I don't keep this in my bug out bag because if you fill it with fuel, the fuel evaporates too quickly. The next thing is a form of cutting tool. Now this one is essentially a good knife to keep on you. It's a heavy knife. You can use it to cut and stuff like that. This one, however, I need to sharpen a little bit more. You can also use it to eat if you need to. Another form of ignition source that I'd suggest getting is like a ferro rod or a fire tube or something of that nature. Um, and something else you want to keep on you just in case it's not like a major thing you have to have. Um, I got one mainly for a prank, but it has multiple purposes for me. Um, Initially, I purchased this for, like I said, as a prank, but when I started prepping, I seen it come in handy for multiple other things, and that is a form of respiratory system. Um, Now this gas mask, uh, I do like to use, and I suggest if you're gonna get a gas mask, get one that you're comfortable with. This one I'm comfortable with. Um, I can purchase extra filters for it as many times as I need to. Um, but in case of like a chemical or biological situation, this comes in handy. Um, you may want to keep some other stuff on hand too, like medical equipment, like bandages, uh, and stuff of that nature. Some other things you might want to keep on hand are uh, tools that you might see as being useful, not stuff that you personally want to keep with you because, oh, this was my grandfather's tool. That's irrelevant. Um, essentially, you want to keep your bug out bag fairly. You don't want to have it overly heavy because if you're trying to get out of an area, you don't want to have to be weighed down by excess weight. Essentially, what a bug out bag I would suggest would be is basically stuff that's essentials. You know, enough food that'll last you a couple days, maybe a week. Um, a light source, an ignition source, some form of knife, uh, medical equipment, um, and if you don't have a knife, you can always make one from a soda can. Yes, it's aluminum. You can even use a tin can, a lid from a tin can to make a knife. But essentially, you want some kind of cutting tool. Um, some other stuff to keep on you is something that's portable that you can use for hunting and get basically hunter gatherer type stuff. Because there are going to be people out there that are going to basically want to live off the land at that point. So you want something that can take down big game or small game. So maybe a 22 rifle, or in my case, I actually have two things that I would use for hunting. I have my bow, which I can use to take down large game like deer and other animals of that size. And for small game, I have my air rifle, which is rated to take down anything up to the size of a raccoon, or even as a squirrel or a possum. I can hunt those kind of animals with that. And essentially, what it is it's not. I'm not saying I don't that I use it for that kind of thing. I don't use it for that. I only use it in a survival scenario for something of that nature. But that is something that you could use because really you need something in order to hunt to get food. Um, Another thing I would suggest keeping on you in a bug out bag is some form of book on said scenario. Um, like for instance, with me, I have a survival book that's from the 1970s for the military that I actually sit and I will reference. As far as an ignition source of any kind, I have my I have a magnesium rod, which is essentially you just scrape off the magnesium into a tinder bundle and then take the flint and strike the flint with it, and it should start a fire. That's one source of ignition I have. Another one is I have a different type of lighter that I keep with me. You can also use some form of solar ignition, like a mirror, or I can even just take the lens of my glasses, take a lens out, and sit there and focus a beam of light onto a tinder bundle and start a fire. So this can also be used as an ignition source. Um, but that's something that is necessary. Um, but if you don't have to leave a particular area, let's say for instance tomorrow something were to happen and our society, our comfortable lifestyle is disrupted abruptly, and we no longer have electricity or running water or anything like that. Um, I could survive here for a couple weeks or a few months if needed. Um, but keeping some form of unperishable food is a helpful thing, and that's something that I do. I have I could probably sit and eat ramen noodles for the next week if I wanted to for lunch and dinner. I got canned food in my one one shelf over there. It's got enough food to last me about a month alone. But that's the thing, if you have stuff that you can actually use that's unperishable, would I eat all that stuff first? No, I'd focus on emptying my refrigerator out. Eat the stuff that's in my refrigerator because that's going to go bad faster than the unperishable stuff. I'm going to eat all, like, I'm going to have, me and my family are going to eat the meats that we have to make sure that those don't go bad. So we'll have meats here to eat for a couple days. We have probably a week's supply of food in our refrigerator. I'd eat that week's supply of food before I'd even touch the unperishable stuff. Another thing you could do is, like I said, with the meats, particular meats, if you have, you can actually smoke them and essentially make jerky, forms of jerky out of it. I got ham butt in the refrigerator. I said butt. But I got a ham in the freezer. I can slice that down into thin strips and make jerky out of it. I don't have to cure it because it's already salty enough as it is. I can just smoke it till it's dried out and just sit there. It'll last as long as possible. As long as moisture doesn't get to it, it should be fine. Another imperishable food is, chips or stuff like that. Is it healthy for you? Not really. But in a survival scenario where you need food and of some sort, it's food. Um, Another thing you want to keep on hand is some form of vessel you can keep liquid in. Now, like for me, where I live right now, kind of handy on the water supply because we have our own private well. It supplies water for the entire uh, community here, but at the same time, it's reliable. Um, but yeah, you just got to have particular things in place for in case of an emergency. If I had to leave here, I am prepared. That's what really a bug out bag is meant for. For the unforeseen. You know, for instance, if there was a tornado that would hit and I need to get out of here because I don't have a basement. I live in a third floor apartment. I don't have a basement. If I needed to get out of here, I'd grab my bug out bag, grab my med kit, and I'd out the door. And I'd get to somewhere where I have shelter. But other people wouldn't be that lucky. And that's one thing I'm trying to get people to understand. Really you should have a bug out bag. It doesn't matter if it's just for an emergency like the power goes out or if it's for, a scenario where you could be in a natural disaster or, you know, anything from a natural disaster up to political upheaval of some sort. You have that there for a particular purpose. It's there not as a because eventually you might not be living a cushy lifestyle, you know, and I understand that firsthand. So I can kind of attest to what I'm saying. A bug out bag does come in handy. Um, but I won't get into that whole subject. But Anyway, if you make a bug out bag, it is helpful to keep on hand because if there were to ever be a time where you may be without a home and you really don't have anywhere else to go, something you can live out of. It at least gives you a cushion for in case of an emergency. Um, Something else I would suggest putting in it, a blanket or a sleeping bag. And the only reason I say that is because if you need to bed down somewhere and you're out in the woods, well, you're going to have a fire, obviously, which you got to keep under control, but you're going to need something to sleep on. And sleeping on the ground is not the greatest of things. And if you watch any survival show, they'll tell you the same thing. It's not wise to sleep on the ground because the ground's cold. And when you lay on the ground, it's going to suck all the heat out of your body because it's cold and you're going to end up getting cold. And it could essentially be fatal to you if you do sleep on the ground, depending on the scenario. Um, you could also get sick from it. But essentially, what I'm trying to relay here is more or less, the understanding. Um, Something else you might want to keep on hand is some kind of other cutting tool other than just a knife. A knife's good for, cutting food and stuff like that. This one, however, is not good for chopping down trees. So, um, essentially, you don't want to use that for, cutting wood of any kind. So, if I would have this knife in my bug out bag, I would keep a hatchet of some sort or an axe as a tool to cut down trees. Um, Essentially, you don't want to cut down live trees because it's harder to light a tree that it was still absorbing moisture. So you want to look for dead trees, ones that are rotting, ones that if you look up, you will not see any green growing on it. And when you cut into it, the bark and the wood inside is extremely dry. That when you go like this, and it will crumble in your hand, essentially, because that's the best wood to burn. It's dry. It's essentially got no moisture in it at all. So it, even though the outside might look wet, you can cut that outside off and set it aside while you're burning the dry stuff. You set it near the fire. It will essentially all that moisture will be evaporated, and you can throw that in. I'm not a survival expert, so I can't really sit there and say, okay, this is what you do. Most of my knowledge I've gained from reading survival books. Um, but it's good to have this stuff on hand because in case of an emergency, you need it. Um, but yeah, you need essential stuff in a bug out bag. Um, like for instance, if I had to bug out of here right now and I had to grab, just a bunch of stuff, random stuff that I'd find as being helpful, I'd grab a knife, grab my axe, I'd grab all my stuff that I have sitting right here that I showed you, maybe not this, or I might keep it and use it as a barter because it's still functional. I mean, as you can see, sparks still fly off of it. It's got a good flint on it. Um, and what I do is I just use this for a barter. I take this and say to somebody, "Oh, I like what you got. What would you take this for?" "Oh yeah, I'll take that." "Okay, here you go." I take what they got. Now, but yeah, I'd grab a blanket, or in this case, this sleeping bag. I'd grab, I might not need this. If I did, I'd throw it on if I needed it right away. I throw that on. That, this, and what other essential stuff I need. But I won't waste my time grabbing, like a gaming system and, stuff that, you look at and you're like, is that really necessary? Do you really need that? No. If I see somebody who's, out in a survival scenario and they have a gaming system or a cell phone that is basically completely useless, it's just basically a glorified paperweight, and they're just sitting there going no, 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 on their phone and not paying attention to what's around them. That's basically like putting up a big sign saying rob me, and you know bandits, I'm an easy target, kind of thing. You don't want to be that person. You don't want to be an easy target. If it comes down to a doomsday scenario where you're out in the middle of nowhere, you don't want to be that easy target. You don't want to be the guy that they're going to pick off because you ain't paying attention to your surroundings and you just walked right into a bandit camp or a raiders camp. I'm going to be the guy that's going to be coming up behind those raiders and taking them out before they even know I was there. That's the type of person I would be. I'd be out in the middle of the forest, and bandits would be trying to find, my camp, and I'll be up in the trees going, dumbasses. Because I know if, I'm living out in the middle of the woods, guess what? My territory. I know the territory like the back of my hand. I'm gonna know where stuff is. Where I'm essentially, I would have the home field advantage. Where all they got is, oh, we know somebody lives in this area. I could set up traps for people, and essentially eliminate threats that would present themselves. And that's something that would be necessary in a survival scenario. You don't want to live in a scenario like that and not know how to essentially eliminate threats with any means necessary. If it means you got to use non lethal force or lethal force, it really shouldn't matter. But essentially, you want to have that knowledge. And another thing that kind of gives me like that X factor kind of thing is, if it came down to it, I have skills that most people nowadays don't have. Like, for instance, some people know on here that I like to blacksmith, make knives and stuff like that. That's an essential skill. That's something that can come in handy. Another skill, uh, making unconventional stuff, like making unconventional housing. Something that would be camouflaged where, you know, you you could be walking out in the middle of nowhere and all you see is you might see a pile of leaves, whereas if I see it, I'm going, oh, hey, there's my house. And really, underneath that pile of leaves is actually a little shack that I could have made. That I could have dug into the dirt, a couple feet, maybe 3 feet into the dirt, and just built like a makeshift little place, and then just threw a roof on top that is essentially basically a giant garden on top, and I just threw leaves on there. And all you're going to see is natural foliage there. You're not going to see, oh, that's somebody's house. And that's the smart thing. If you're going to do something, you know, you're going to live in a scenario like that. You want to kind of camouflage yourself so that people don't know, hey, this is somebody's home. No, they're going to look at it and go, Oh, that's just probably leaves. Alright, that's just vegetation. But yeah, essentially, you want to have the most intelligent way of doing things. Other than that, um, my advice is when you're out in the middle of nowhere, you don't want to try and, have like a bonfire or anything like that because that's just drawing attention. Um, so like if I were going to cook food or something like that, I'd do it in a way where, you're not gonna see it. You're not gonna know. Oh, someone's over there making a meal for themselves because there are ways around that. Like smokeless fire pits. Okay. Now most of you are probably looking at me going, huh? The military uses these so that they don't draw enemy soldiers in. What they will do is they'll start a fire, take a sheet of metal, put their food on it, fold the sides in, lay it down on top of the fire, and then cover it with dirt or sand so that the food cooks on the hot coals, but you're not going to see the smoke because it's no longer a fire, it's just hot coals cooking your food. Um, but yeah, that's one thing I would do. And it's good to have some of this knowledge. My advice is really look into what you can do. Um, but essentially, um, this is what I wanted to talk about too. You want to keep something that keeps you up to date on knowledge, because as you learn stuff, you're also going to forget stuff while you're learning. So, one thing I suggest keeping on hand is some kind of survival manual. This is the one I keep. As you can see, Department of the Army. It's a field manual, and it essentially has beneficial stuff in it, like telling you what plants you can eat, what plants to avoid, um, certain things that you can eat, uh, animals you can hunt and trap, ways to trap animals, uh, things to avoid, what are uh, dangerous, what and stuff like that. Um, Something else it shows you is how to start fires, like how to make a bow drill, or how to use flint and steel, or how to use a lens out of binoculars to make fire. Um, okay, this one's gonna sound a little weird, but there's actually one in here called a fire thong. Fire saws, uh, ways to cook without using actually making smoke, uh, how to clean and prepare animals, um, how to make shelters, how to hunt certain things. Again, edible plants. Uh, but essentially, it has a bunch of stuff in here that will is useful. Um, as well as hazardous creatures to avoid. Um, or how to maintain and deal with certain creatures. Like, for people who live in desert climates, how to actually hunt and eliminate certain animals that could be edible, but at the same time could be a danger to you. For instance, and one I kind of dread having to deal with, snakes. It actually tells you how to deal with snakes in here, like basically taking a long enough stick that you're not within striking range of the snake, where you can take it and lay it down over top of its head so it can't move its head, or it can't move itself enough that it can bite you, but you can cut off its head, and then you can take the body, clean the body, and eat it. I know, ugh, but it's something that's out there. Another one is that it shows in here is how to prevent yourself from being stung by scorpions or bitten by particular lizards that other than snakes that are also venomous. Um, but yeah, it's an essential book that I suggest. I suggest this book to people, um, and I suggest keeping it in a bug out bag. So yeah, it's an essential. To me, this is an essential because as you're trying to go through a survival scenario or a bug out scenario in this case, um, it's good to have something like this on hand because you may come into a situation where you're sitting there and you're like, I remember reading in that book a scenario like this. I'm gonna look in that book to see what they say. I mean, you might not have the ideal scenario where it's like, oh, it's flat land near water and, blah, 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 like the book may tell you, but you may be in a scenario where you can make yourself more comfortable in an environment. May not be flat land. It could be, a slope that's, gradual grade or even high grade where you can kind of make it work for you. But other than that, I'd like to say I hope this video was informative. Please leave a like and subscribe, and comment your opinions and questions down below. If I see them and I do not answer them right away, do not feel offended or try blowing up my YouTube page. I will try and get to them as soon as I can. I hope everybody has a nice day and hope to see you again very soon.